Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alan Cunningham. I am an aviation lawyer at DLA Piper in London. So we did this panel discussion this time last year when we didn't know very much about what Brexit would look like. I think we've moved forward a little bit, but not very, very far. I'm joined this afternoon by four very experienced industry old hands. On the far left is Stockton Birthisel. Stockton is the principal at Atlas Corporate Services, which is a specialist fiduciary service provider in the Isle of Man, and is well known for VAT, customs, importation, tax structures. Graham Williamson is probably known to many of you. Graham has voted with his feet and gone to Ireland, where he started an operator called Sonus, which means happiness in Gaelic, and next to Graham is Marc Bailey. Marc is also very well known in the industry. He is CEO of BBGA. He's on lots of committees within EASA or reporting to EASA and lobbying EASA, and is an engineer by trade. And next to me is Matthieu de Varax. Matthieu is a lawyer in Paris, a specialist aviation lawyer, and has recently started a boutique law firm called Odi-sé Avocats. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about two scenarios. One is, there's lots of euphemisms in Brexit, but one is a hard Brexit, a clean break Brexit, a no-deal Brexit. And one is, the other scenario is a deal Brexit, which is leaving the European Union after signing a withdrawal agreement and an implementation period. So we're going to talk about those two scenarios. And we're also going to talk about four topics. And those topics are traffic rights, ownership and control issues, EASA and licensing, and of course customs, VAT and importation. So Marc, I'd like to start with you. For those of you who have not read the withdrawal agreement, it makes no mention of aviation at all, apart from Gibraltar Airport and biometric passports. But the political declaration does have a very short section on the screen now on aviation. And so, Marc, what would you like to see if we do a deal? What would you like to see the outcome of the political declaration be and the comprehensive transport agreement that it envisages?
That's a lovely start point. I think we've made our position really known to our own government, and what's been taken forward to DEXU. And what we want as industry is absolutely clear. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about business aviation or scheduled aviation. We're looking for a solution that allows us to have the access. From an EASA point of view, we've contributed so much, and therefore it's vital that we stay involved with that process. And secondly, the access to single European skies is part of the solution that we have asked to receive. Whether we get anything like that, we really don't know the answer to it. And DFT aren't able to answer. In truth, they're not even allowed to the table. There have been no negotiations to aviation at all. It's all the headline things that you hear in the popular press. That's the level of what's being discussed. So we're not even being called to the table to get into any detail.
Graham, do you think that post-Brexit non-UK operators, so EU operators, will be able to do charter from London to New York and London to Dubai?
Certainly at the moment, the latest indication is that the UK position is to try and have some reciprocity with Europe. Europe has said that there will be a period of 9 to 12 months in which up to 4 freedoms would be allowed. So we do know for certain both sides are saying we've got to find a way to keep flying. Driven by the airlines, but equally, obviously, will fall into that category. Where it becomes a challenge, and obviously if there's a withdrawal agreement, a second referendum, all of those things are great. It means we have time to continue to look at detail. One thing I was going to suggest is rather than have half an hour Brexit, we'll just put the BBC News on for half an hour, because Theresa May is having yet another debate today about what may or may not happen. But in terms of traffic rights, the concern is, and if good heads don't prevail, and there is a hard Brexit, then it will be very limited as to what you can do from a cabotage perspective. So UK point-to-point, in and out of Europe is fine, but UK aircraft flying from and internally in Europe or from Europe outside of the EU to the US, for instance, could be challenged. And I think from a European perspective, well, not being able to do domestic flights in the UK is probably not as bad as the UK operators not flying in Europe or transatlantic.
So what trips from, say, London to the States, Hong Kong, that kind of stuff, what are the most profitable trips that EU operators will lose, and what are the most profitable trips that UK operators will lose?
That's difficult to quantify. Most profitable trips depends on the aircraft, the range. I mean, obviously, the UK is pretty much a gateway to the US, so there's a lot of traffic transatlantic that passes through. I do think we shouldn't get overreact. I genuinely believe that it is in no one's interest to try and create some form of protectionism. However, the one thing that's common, and there's a lot of good information out there, we have the internet now, and EASA have published a lot of information even in recent weeks. It is unlikely that scenario will be that, but the issue will be about reciprocity, and therefore the other operators, it won't be the governments that challenge, it will be other operators that challenge.
So give us an idea, cash-wise, of this reciprocity. Routes like London-Moscow, how important is that for EU operators, and trips like Moscow-Nice, how important is that for UK operators?
Certainly there are specific routes, and flying from the CIS into south of France, etc., is very popular. The impact will be much more significant for the UK operators if those routes are restricted in some way. But equally, obviously private flights will not be affected. This is only commercial operations. It will perhaps have an impact on clients that, even though that the aircraft is actually being operated commercially, for their business purposes, so that's still an unknown. In terms of putting an economic price on this, I couldn't hazard a guess. But I do think there will be uncertainty, and there will be a period of perhaps a few weeks when people are scratching their heads a little bit and saying, well, can we do that? Should we do that? And we really don't know.
Can I just come in on the point about protectionism? And I think there's a bit of a dangerous path there if we're not careful. One of the things that used to get involved in is looking after the permitting process for the UK. As an association, I threw that ball back to DFT some time ago because you can't really read your own gas meter and complain at the same time. The truth of the matter is, in running that process, what we saw is that two things would happen. First of all, everyone would start out with the intention of coming to the country under an AOC. When it got difficult, they'd switch to private flying. So think about greying a legal charter, because that's something that we could end up driving back in. That's one of the prime things that I think we have to be really careful of. So it's just worth making that point. The other thing is the whole process of objecting to a flight. You're doing it with the intention of getting some benefit, either for your organisation or the country. All I ever saw were flights that were stopped, no one else picking them up, and what we stopped were the inward investors coming to the UK. So all that does is damage our business as a whole. So protectionism, I don't think, is a positive road to go down. Thank you.
So, Matthieu, what is the view from France in relation to this comprehensive transport agreement? Has anybody heard of it in France? Or
well, it's not just France; it's the continent as a whole. Someone has to bring bad news, and I have a feeling that I'm the one on this panel bringing the bad news. I wouldn't talk about protectionism, but I would refer to the to the rules, and we're discussing traffic rights. And I think it's important for everyone in the room to understand that traffic rights come as a package together with the European Union and the single market. And once the UK leave the EU, it won't be given the same access to those traffic rights as it had before. Whether or not we'll have a deal, actually, it will make a difference, but and obviously it will be chaos if there's no deal.
Well, let's just look at that for a second. So, we're talking about traffic rights, but does anybody actually expect there to be less traffic? Does anybody expect there to be fewer flights because of Brexit?
Well, if there's no deal, which again, no one in this room hopes this will happen, but if there's no deal, what the treaties say anyway, is that traffic rights, as they currently exist for the UK being a member of the EU, will walk away, will disappear. So, this is why actually the Commission has adopted, has prepared draft regulation, one of which is precisely focused on connectivity and allowing UK operators to fly in Europe.
Isn't the ability to fly into Europe a Chicago Convention right anyway? I mean, they've had that right since 1944, haven't they?
It is, but that is subject to each individual country's own regulation and approval. The benefit of the traffic rights within the EU is it's fully automatic and it's a complete freedom to fly from any 2 points in the EU, even in one country, which is referred to as cabotage. And that will disappear, comes 30th March.
Okay, so Stockton, we heard yesterday from Lassie that they touched on importation, and Lassie very helpfully reminded everybody that there are only two ways to bring an aircraft into the EU. One was permanent importation, and the other was temporary. So, will G-registered and Manx-registered aircraft become the subject of temporary importation? Will temporary admission become popular?
Well, I think it certainly will be, a very important thing to consider, but don't forget that the analysis is different if it's a private aircraft versus a commercial aircraft, because generally speaking, temporary admission only applies to private use. One of the things that's often overlooked, and perhaps it's because we're adopting the British perspective, is that we worry about whether or not we'll have to go under temporary admission to Europe. But don't forget, the opposite applies. And in fact, there is a draft statutory instrument on this, so that European registered aircraft owned by European people will have the same issues that currently applies when we think about temporary admission into the EU. And similarly, European operators for European aircraft, whether commercial or private, will also have to start thinking about a possible importation into the UK. Again, there is draft legislation being worked on, which is voluminous, to address this particular point.
So for aircraft, let's say on the G-Reg or the Manx-Reg, what are the options for the owners and operators of those aircraft going into Europe? Will they double import them, or will they?
Well, as Lassie said, there's only two things you can do in this respect. So one would be temporary admission and the second would be permanent import. I mean, I've never been a huge fan of temporary admission, and a lot of the reason for that is certainly in Europe, as is common with European law, as many member states there are, that's how many interpretations that you have of temporary admission, which is, I would consider, rife with problems. The two main problems are what constitutes commercial use, and the second, which is perhaps even more difficult, is the prohibitions against carrying people who are fiscally resident in the EU. And again, I was looking at this the other day, the UK draft legislation on the point, the same thing will apply when a European operator seeks to, temporarily admit into the UK. The permanent import option is probably the most difficult, so I could, in a way, see why people might want to go under temporary admission, because it's going to be extremely difficult for a person established in the UK with a UK or Isle of Man registered aircraft to import an aircraft into the EU and vice versa. A lot of it is to do with the status of customs agents. Again, this is far too technical to get into, but I've been working on this for a considerable while since the referendum results were received, which happened to be on my birthday, June 24th, not exactly the birthday present I was expecting. And the way forward is not at all clear. So we can only hope for a resolution here.
So in terms of customs duty and VAT, currently the UK, under EU law, has got to apply a VAT rate of at least 15%, and then it can apply a higher rate if it chooses. Can you see, or do you think it would be a good idea for the UK to either reduce it to the pre-2011 rules, to 0%, or to 2%, or 10%? Do you see any change in VAT?
Well, my personal prediction would be no, because I think the Exchequer will have holes to fill. But I think that this would be a very good thing to happen. And indeed, it might be, possible that we'd even go back to the old rules in 2010, whereby any aircraft in excess of 8,000 kilos maximum takeoff weight was considered, zero rated. So obviously, from a British perspective, we'd be looking to stimulate aviation, the aviation sector, and of course there are other, initiatives occurring in this regard, which Marc and Graham know quite a lot about.
Marc, in the Department for Transport's aviation strategy, Aviation 2050, they are proposing abandoning completely rules on ownership and control. And so opening the ownership and control for airlines and operators to everybody, whether it's Chinese, Americans, British, our friends in the EU. How do you see that affecting our industry?
I think there's a few important points there. I think going on from talking about the detailed models that people may put in place, the one thing I'm convinced about, we're already seeing innovative models developing that will find ways around whatever comes in front of us. So actually, I don't get the sense of fear. I see a lot of people viewing it as an opportunity. So whatever that proposal that's going into the future aviation strategy, we will make sure that we've got our inroads into that. And actually, they are listening to us. Because one of the things I would say, that future aviation strategy, whatever you think of the current green paper, the one difference is it actually has a section about our community, even uses the term GA commercial, and previously GAE to them meant leisure and recreation. So we've got a good start point as far as that's concerned. In fact, all of our debates about what's going on with Brexit, that's pretty much out of our control at this point in time. However, we can have a significant influence on what we're going to do with that future aviation strategy that's going to be developed through the next 9 months. So from our point of view, if you think of one of the major threats that we're facing, I haven't seen it anywhere on the agenda. We're actually being pressed at this point in time as a business aviation community with what's happening on slot availability and the pressure that's going on 2 of our major use airports at the moment with Luton and Stansted. So we've suddenly lost night slots, and it's come into absolute clarity that slots don't work for our sector.
So one of the questions here is maybe the over-prominence of Brexit. Are we overthinking Brexit? Is it the new Y2K? Some people have said it's a bit like the Great British Bake Off, in that when it moved from BBC One to Channel 4, people thought it would be the end of the world, and in fact, nothing happened. So is Brexit the new Bake Off?
My opinion, and I'm already saying, I feel it has an element of the Bake Off to it, because I really think the things that we can influence are within our grasp. And if we don't make sure that we can keep our borders open in the UK, some of the things that we could do with allowing clients to give them access to the airports where they want to arrive to, make it transparent and easy for people to do business with us, we'd be a lot better off by lobbying and putting our effort into that and getting it into our future aviation strategy. We need to think really hard about what our network of airfields is going to look like for 2050. Because I'm going to say something fairly contentious now. Sure as hell, scheduled aviation will take over what's going on in Luton and Stansted by that time. That's just the law of the growth of what's going on. So we need to get a well-established network for what we're going to do. So there's loads and loads of things I'm going to be looking for everyone in this audience, or certainly the UK-based people, to push in the future aviation strategy and make sure we're really heard.
So, Matthieu and Graham, on the relaxation or the proposed relaxation of ownership and control in the UK, do you see EU operators holding 2 AOCs, one in the EU and one in the UK?
Well, at the moment, it's difficult to foresee such a situation because, again, EU rule apply. In a nutshell, for a EU operator to obtain and maintain an AOC, it must have its headquarters in one of the member states, and 51% of its capital must be owned by EU nationals. So again, comes March 30th, it's not just UK operators, it's also operations on the continent that are, or in the rest of Europe, sorry, but Ireland, that are owned by UK nationals that will have to restructure fairly dramatically their shareholding structure to adapt.
The question really is that they could establish a subsidiary in the UK and apply for a UK AOC as well as their own EASA AOC. Do you see that happening?
Oh, you're talking about EU operators coming to the UK?
Yes.
Well, because they will have the same problem accessing the UK market, it might be something they want to consider, yeah, sure.
And I think you need to be aware, when we do ownership control, there's 2 things that are critical. The first one is that to hold a valid operating license, it's not the AOC, to have an operating license and to have intra-EU traffic rights, then 51% must be owned by Europeans. You know, I've just applied for an AOC, as you know, in Ireland, and I have an Irish passport. The majority of the shareholders will be Europeans, and that's not negotiable, and they're very strict. So I think, you know, in the past, perhaps there have been vehicles of we'll create a subsidiary, but the ownership and the shareholding needs to rest with, and at the moment, the other way around, that if you wish to continue with the UK AOC, then at least 51% of the shareholders must be citizens of the UK. Fortunately, you can have 2 passports, but anyway, that's another matter. But yeah, so ownership and control, I think most people, of the 4 things that we're worried about, I think ownership and control, most people have thought, hey, you know what, there's ways around that. You know, we'll just change the structure. Traffic rights, I think, as we started on earlier, is the clear and present issue, because there's a little bit of opportunity there. You know, I have colleagues on the board of EBAA, you know, with French companies and German companies who are saying, well, hang on a minute, if you're not in the union, why would you have the same rights and privileges that I have? So there will be competition created by this. And the UK is a small part of Europe. You know, there is no question that, and it's been very clear, and it's been clear by Barnier and by EASA, you know, they said, measures cannot replicate the benefits of membership of the union. And that is the transition. Forget hard Brexit. There will be difficulties, particularly for UK operators, in whatever circumstance other than, you know, we all wake up and forget about the whole thing.
So I think of the top 20 business aviation airports in Europe, 5 of them are around London. Do you still see those airports as being just as important after Brexit? And will that adversely affect British operators and owners?
Again, I think the question there is why are they currently in the top 20 is because people want to go to London. I'm pretty sure that won't change. You know, there will be solutions, exactly as Marc said, there will be solutions. You know, Swiss aircraft operate happily in Europe, Danish aircraft. I'm sure we will find a way that business will prevail. And, you know, London won't be closed down. However, I do think that those airports will see some potential reduction in traffic if it's transitory. you know, and if it's people going from other parts of Europe. So, yeah, it will drop off, I'm sure, but not considerably.
Stockton, if in the envisaged comprehensive transport agreement, British operators and carriers are given access within the EU for flights within the EU, and vice versa, can we be in a different customs union for aircraft? Would those aircraft still need to be imported? Or would it follow that if we have reciprocal traffic rights, that there needs to be a single customs union for those aircraft?
Yes. Well, I mean, as we discussed earlier, it is, of course, possible to have a customs union or a single customs territory for a particular class of assets. So obviously it would be amazingly wonderful if that could happen. But generally speaking, you know, I think that the devil's in the detail, and this is certainly a incredibly complex area of law. So I think to definitively, you know, respond to your question, I think we would have to see more detail. One of the points that the panel also discussed prior to today was the fact that it wouldn't make any sense at all to have a air transport agreement between the EU and the UK if the customs law did not assist in realizing that, which is kind of a point I miss myself because I'm not an aircraft operator, but I think that's a very important thing to speak to. And so I would encourage, you know, all of the participants in the audience to, you know, lobby their MPs on, you know, or industry bodies or whatever voice that we think we can find in order to, you know, to arrive at a sensible solution.
Marc, the political declaration talks about close cooperation between EASA and the UK CAA. What do you think that's going to look like in practice?
As you may be aware at the moment, EASA and CAA are instructed not to talk to each other. However, it's always been a very close relationship. 30% of the resources of EASA are provided by the CAA. A lot of the driving, that's not banging the drum, a lot of the driving forces in the working groups are UK-based. EASA would not benefit from the withdrawal of those resources. I think there will...
Give us an idea of the sort of proportion of those resources provided by the UK CAA and the types of roles that the UK CAA performs within EASA.
It's right the way across the piece. So it doesn't matter which one of the directorates you're talking about, there is a UK presence in those working groups. And it is 30% of the staffing that EASA utilises. So there's not an area that we're precluded from. We are pretty active in all of those groups. Even if you look at the Industry Advisory Board, round there is a whole gathering from OEMs, operators, our community, leisure and recreation, even the unions. But the proportion of UK representation around the table is actually quite disproportionate. Again, it's about 30% of the people that are sitting around that forum. So there's a lot to contribute, and that contribution and shaping has taken on from the days of JAA. From our point of view, it's to our benefit to stay inside EASA activity. We've contributed so much time. The consequences of not doing so, our friends at the CAA are preparing and already have recruited 2 or 3 people in project roles specifically for the changeover to ownership. Our regulator will need at least 300 people in order to make that work, and that's on a transition basis to even take back over some of the design activities. No one wants to get into that position because it won't be positive. We'll end up with divergence of regulations, and then we're into the free circulation of aircraft, not for VAT reasons, but because we'll start to get technical differences and additional national requirements. So it is in no one's interest, EASA included as well as ourselves, for separating.
Matthieu and Graham, what should pilots and engineers be doing in terms of their own licensing in preparation for Brexit?
Well, I can tell you that 30,000 British pilots applied for Irish licenses in the last 6 months, and that pattern is closed. And a lot of guys I know, pilots are reluctant to spend money, no disrespect, guys, but, there's a cost, and you can't hold 2 licenses. So a lot of people waited because they didn't want to spend 700-800 euros on switching to Portuguese, Spanish, German, French, didn't matter. Now there's a bit of a rush because, for instance, if you are a UK pilot and your license was issued by the CAA, then as of the 30th of March, at this moment, you can't fly a European registered aircraft. You're a third country operator.
So are you saying that pretty much every pilot who needs to prepare, every pilot with a British license, who needs to prepare pretty much already has done?
A lot have tried. No, there's many pilots that are still holding UK licenses, and hopefully that will be okay. What you'll find, it's a bit of a one-way street. The UK have said they will accept EASA licenses for 2 years. They'll need a validation, but they will be accepted. So a Swiss pilot, sorry, not Swiss, that's the exception. A French pilot flying a UK aircraft can continue to do so for 2 years, as long as the 300 people in the CAA have time to process the validations. But a UK pilot flying a Maltese registered aircraft today, in theory, that will not continue beyond the 29th of March. So it is a problem. That also applies to, in our industry, less so cabin crew attestation and engineering licenses. It could be a problem.
Matthieu, you'll have seen the reports from the EU Parliament that some of the MEPs are trying to put forward a different proposal than the Commission in relation to the limits on capacity for non-British operators like Ryanair and Wizz Air and people like that. Do you think the Commission will come under any pressure from those MEPs, or we'll just ignore them and carry on?
It's very difficult to judge. I mean, the last word, the last say will be the Commission anyway. But there's huge pressure at the moment on everyone on both sides of the channel to come to a deal. I just don't believe that we'll hit March 30th with no deal. I mean, it will be complete nonsense. People in the room would have seen Tom Mendes, the CEO of Airbus, sort of presentation or speech last week. There's another example of there's so many people that are going to be affected by this that it will force a deal. Same for BA, which seems to be, the whole group seems to be in a very embarrassing situation if we are in a no deal situation. So yes, there's pressure on the Commission to get a more flexible deal. But over the last 2 years, the Commission, everyone, Michel Barnier, everyone out there has been very, very cautious to stick to the principles of the treaties and the Union. So flexibility, yes, but I would see that as fairly limited.
Marc, question from the floor for you. Why have our industry bodies not done more sooner to lobby for our ability to stay in EASA and protect the UK aviation business? I guess that's the contrary of what's actually happened.
Yeah, I'm interested where that question came from. If we could have a spotlight go onto that corner. From the point of view of what we've tried to do, right from the beginning, we've been in with not only DFT, but we've been alongside our colleagues in what was Barter and Airlines of UK and the MROs throughout UK to agree what our position was going to be. We made sure that we put that position forward to the DFT and saw the documentation that went through to DEXU to declare our position. So the declared position is there. Whether there's the political will to follow through with the people at the negotiating table is a different matter. None of us have been asked to go alongside a negotiating team yet and help in negotiations in a European forum. That's because no one's been allowed to the table at all from aviation at this point in time. So I think we've been trying to represent as much as we can. The other thing that we've got from a UK perspective, we've got the all-party political groups, and that group is effectively being run by Grant Shapps and had a focus on leisure and recreation. There used to be something like 25 MPs looking at that. Over the last 18 months, that's developed into around about 180 MPs and Lords that are now interested in aviation. Half of them possibly for political reasons, but half of them because they actually are genuinely interested in aviation activities. So we've got people in all of those working groups. I'm on 3 of those party political groups and make sure that we represent our position as a community into that. So we lobby in there, plus we've got European Voices with our friends at EBAA, and we've got our own other vehicles that we have links into, and we make sure that we not only go into EASA, but we have various sessions with the Commission. So I would seek advice on other things that we could do. You can always do more, but we're not sitting back and doing nothing.
Okay, I'll just ask each of you to finish, so we finish on time. If each of you could give me your view as to whether you think the UK will leave the EU on the 29th, and whether they will leave with or without a deal. Stockton, let's start with you.
I would say we'll be leaving on the 29th without a deal.
Okay. On time, no deal. Graham?
Ask me in 59 days.
Well, we're asking you now.
No, I mean, the fact is that we will know soon. If you haven't done any preparation, it's too late. So you might as well just wait 59 days, and from that point forwards, we can make contingency. We'll always find a way, we'll always find a solution. So, but do I believe we'll stay in? I don't believe that Brexit will happen. I really don't.
So no exit. Marc?
Well, I'm not going to wait as long as Graham. I'd love to see what the amendments come out with later on today. I think that will shape which direction we're going. Do I think we'll leave without a deal? I don't think we'll leave without a deal. There will be some form of negotiated settlement, but it's an interesting game of poker that we're watching.
So do you think we'll leave with a deal on time?
I think we'll leave with a deal.
Matthieu?
I would vote for a deal on time. As I said earlier, I just don't believe that the UK is going to leave to do a crash Brexit like this. So yes, I would vote for a deal at the very last minute.
Very last minute. Well, I can tell you that we're on time. It's now 1 o'clock. So I'd like to thank you for your time and thank the panel for their time.